Rain fell in a relentless drizzle over the quiet streets of occupied Paris, soaking the cobblestones and turning them into slick mirrors of the dim gaslight. Shadows stretched across narrow alleys, hiding faces both familiar and unknown. In a small, modest apartment above a shuttered cafe, Marie, a young widow in her mid-20s, sat at a wooden desk, her hands trembling as she held a single envelope. The scent of damp paper mixed with the faint aroma of coffee brewing downstairs, ordinary details in a city gripped by extraordinary tension. Paris had been silent in appearance, yet beneath the surface, secrets moved like currents in the Seine, swift, invisible, and dangerous. German officers in their crisp gray uniforms patrolled the streets, while whispers of resistance operations flickered from one hidden corner to the next. Every letter, every courier, every word could carry life or death. And tonight, Marie held a simple piece of paper that could determine the course of events far beyond her tiny apartment. Her husband had died in 1942, a casualty of an Allied bombing raid, leaving her alone yet determined. She had become adept at observing small details, reading subtle expressions, and recognizing the tension in a conversation that seemed casual on the surface. When she had received the envelope earlier that day, it appeared innocuous, a letter addressed in a familiar handwriting, but her instincts whispered otherwise. Something about the phrasing, the folds, the unusual timing suggested it was more than correspondence. It was a message from a spy, a signal she could not ignore. In that moment, in the ordinary world of mourning and quiet survival collided with the extraordinary dangers of espionage. One letter, held in her hands, carried the weight of a double agent's secret, the potential betrayal of countless lives, and the fate of Allied operations in France. Every second felt stretched, every shadow suspect, every sound, the clatter of a cart, a distant cough, a possible harbinger of discovery. Marie's decision to act, to read and respond carefully, would set in motion a chain of events that no one could have anticipated. In the silence of her apartment, surrounded by the ordinary remnants of daily life, a young widow prepared to become a guardian of secrets. Unseen by the occupiers, she was about to stop a spy and alter the course of covert operations in ways history would quietly remember. Who could have sent the letter, and what secrets did it contain? That question haunted Marie as she examined the envelope on her small wooden desk. The handwriting was familiar, almost comforting, yet something was off, too precise, too deliberate, as if the sender were aware that the letter might be intercepted. In occupied Paris, where German officers scrutinized mail and every courier could be a threat, the simple act of receiving correspondence carried risk. And this letter, she sensed, was no ordinary message. The puzzle deepened as she unfolded the paper. Hidden in plain sight were subtle clues, phrases that seemed ordinary at first, but, when read carefully, suggested coded instructions. The letter hinted at contacts, movements, and locations, all tied to an unknown network of operatives. A double agent, it seemed, had infiltrated Allied intelligence channels. And this missive was a small fragment of a much larger, dangerous web. Marie understood immediately that ignoring it was not an option. To do so would risk the exposure of resistance members and Allied operations. Her dilemma was profound. She was one young woman, alone in a city teeming with spies, informants, and soldiers. Acting too hastily could alert the double agent, compromise innocent lives, or result in her arrest, or worse. But hesitating carried its own peril. The letter represented an opportunity to intercept a spy, to disrupt a network that could have disastrous consequences if left unchecked. Each word, each punctuation mark seemed weighted with meaning, and interpreting it correctly was a matter of life and death. Marie began to analyze the letter with a meticulous eye. Certain phrases were oddly repetitive, others were emphasized in ways that seemed unnecessary for ordinary communication. tiny markings along the margins, slight smudges in the ink, and even the folding pattern of the paper suggested deliberate encoding. It was a covert signal disguised as mundane correspondence, intended to pass unnoticed by the untrained eye. She realized that understanding it required patience, intelligence, and courage, all in equal measure. Questions piled upon each other. Who was the agent? How long had he been operating in Paris? How many others were involved? And what was the ultimate goal of the network? Could a young widow, bereaved and living quietly under the watchful gaze of the occupiers, decipher the clues and prevent catastrophe? The stakes were immense, and every second counted. The letter was both a trap and an opportunity, a single missive capable of exposing a hidden spy, protecting lives, and altering the trajectory of covert operations in the city. History, as Marie would soon learn, often hinges on seemingly small decisions. In this case, one careful reading, one correct interpretation, and a single letter could prevent betrayal on a scale that few could even imagine. The mystery of the missive was not just about its sender or content. It was about whether an ordinary civilian, equipped only with observation and courage, could step into the shadows of espionage and act decisively to protect the greater good. Paris, in 1943, was a city caught between beauty and fear. The grand boulevards, lined with tall, elegant buildings and cafes once bustling with conversation, now bore the scars of war. Shuttered windows, faded posters, and the occasional bullet hole whispered of recent raids and ongoing occupation. German soldiers patrolled with mechanical precision, their gray coats and polished boots striking a rhythm that reminded every citizen that the city belonged, at least temporarily, to a foreign authority. Yet beneath the shadow of occupation, life persisted. Children chased one another in the narrow courtyards, street vendors called out in hushed tones, and ordinary Parisians attempted to maintain the semblance of routine while watching carefully for danger. Marie, a young widow in her mid-20s, had once lived a life of ordinary happiness. She had married in her early 20s, a brief union cut short by the war when her husband was killed in a bombing raid in 1942. Since then, her life had become one of quiet resilience. She ran a small seamstress shop in the Marais district, sewing, mending, and sometimes creating modest clothing for neighbors. Her work required meticulous attention to detail, dexterous hands, and a sharp eye for imperfection, all skills that would soon prove invaluable in a very different arena. Her days followed a careful rhythm. Dawn brought the sound of bells from the nearby church, the smell of fresh bread from the boulangerie below, and the distant clatter of horse-drawn carts. Marie opened her shutters carefully, scanned the streets for unusual movements, and greeted neighbors with a practiced neutrality that disguised her acute awareness of everything around her. She had learned to notice patterns in footsteps, subtle changes in conversation, and the behavior of strangers, a skill honed by necessity in a city teeming with spies, informants, and German patrols. Despite the danger, Marie's shop served as a small refuge. The hum of her sewing machine, the soft scent of fabric, and the quiet sunlight that filtered through dust-speckled windows created a sense of normalcy. Yet within this ordinary space, extraordinary events were about to unfold. The arrival of a single letter, a seemingly innocuous piece of paper, would transform her life, placing her at the center of a covert intelligence operation. She was ordinary in appearance, unarmed and seemingly vulnerable, yet her mind was sharp, cautious, and observant. Her status as a widow allowed her a degree of invisibility. People overlooked her, assuming she was occupied with mourning or domestic concerns, but this very invisibility would become her strength. In a city where secrets moved faster than patrols and messages traveled through hidden networks, Marie's keen perception, patience, and courage would become tools to intercept a double agent, prevent betrayal, and protect countless lives. In the quiet of her shop, surrounded by fabric, thread, and the rhythm of daily work, Marie was about to enter a world where observation, intuition, and subtle action would have consequences far beyond the walls of her small apartment, a world where one letter could alter the course of war. The first hints that something was amiss were almost imperceptible. At first, Marie noticed small irregularities in the behavior of her neighbors and in the movement of people along her street. Couriers delivered packages at unusual hours, often leaving them outside a door or beneath a doorstep before slipping away into the shadows. Some strangers lingered a moment too long, their eyes scanning the street as if seeking someone or something. In a city accustomed to war, these small anomalies were easy to dismiss, yet Marie's instincts, sharpened by grief and attentiveness, flagged them immediately. The letter she had received crystallized her suspicions. It was written in a handwriting that was carefully controlled, precise, almost too perfect. Certain phrases were oddly repeated, some words emphasized in unusual ways, and subtle ink smudges along the margins suggested deliberate encoding. Marie understood, instinctively, that this was not a personal note from a friend or acquaintance. It was a message meant for someone trained to understand hidden meanings, someone embedded in a web of secrecy. She began to observe her environment more closely. A man in a gray coat started appearing near her apartment at irregular intervals, never entering but always watching. He carried a briefcase, sometimes leaving it behind for brief moments before returning. Occasionally, he exchanged quick, almost imperceptible signals with another figure across the street, gestures that seemed casual but were too deliberate to be a coincidence. Every movement, every glance seemed calculated. Other details compounded her unease. Neighbors whispered of unexpected visits from men in plain clothes who asked vague questions about residents' routines or deliveries. A package she had accepted for a friend contained an extra note tucked among ordinary correspondence, marked with symbols matching those in the letter she had received. The same symbols appeared faintly etched into the wooden frame of her window, a subtle, almost invisible signal designed to go unnoticed. The tension grew. Marie knew she was dealing with a network, not a single agent. Each new observation confirmed the presence of a double agent operating within the city, coordinating messages, and potentially directing information to German intelligence. The stakes were immediate. One wrong move could compromise her, innocent neighbors, or entire Allied operations. The danger was invisible, embedded in ordinary routines, gestures, and everyday objects. By the end of the week, Marie had identified patterns in the courier's movements, the timing of letters, and the placement of coded messages. And she realized that the double agent was testing the city's vigilance, seeking openings, and relying on the assumption that ordinary citizens would overlook subtle signs. It was clear to her that the letter she held and the seemingly ordinary environment around her were part of a complex game, a covert operation where the slightest misjudgment could have deadly consequences. Marie now faced a choice: ignore the signals and risk betrayal, or intervene with careful observation and courage, using only her mind and intuition to disrupt a dangerous espionage network operating silently in plain sight. The ordinary rhythms of her life had collided with the extraordinary reality of war, and she could not turn away. Marie's investigation began with patience and an acute attention to detail. She could not confront the double agent directly, and the risks were too great. Instead, she meticulously examined the letter, noting every peculiarity, the way certain letters were curved, the spacing between words, and faint pencil marks along the margins. Each anomaly seemed deliberate, a part of a coded system intended for someone trained to recognize it. For the first time, Marie realized the letter was not just communication, It was a map, a set of instructions, and a warning all at once. Using her sharp memory, she cross-referenced the letter with her observations of suspicious activity around her apartment and in the surrounding streets. The man in the gray coat, previously appearing at random, now revealed a pattern. His visits coincided with the delivery of letters, packages, or other signs. She began recording his movements in a small notebook, noting times, locations, and unusual behaviors. She also began to track the placement of seemingly ordinary items, folded newspapers, bundles of twine, and discarded wrappers that, under scrutiny, appeared to mark signals or drop points. One clue in particular drew her attention. The letter contained a series of letters slightly darker than the rest, almost imperceptible at first glance. Marie experimented with different arrangements of these letters, eventually realizing they formed the initials of several safe houses known to Allied operatives. These initials corresponded to street corners, apartment buildings, and shops that she recognized from her daily observations. It became clear that the double agent had been relaying critical information to German intelligence through this network. Marie carefully reconstructed the courier's route using her notes, the letter, and local knowledge. She identified patterns in timing. Certain streets were used at dawn, others in the afternoon when German patrols were minimal. Drop points were disguised as ordinary objects, a milk crate, a rolled rug, or a stack of newspapers, camouflaged in plain sight. Each discovery reinforced her understanding of the network's sophistication, and each finding heightened the stakes, reminding her that one misstep could expose her or compromise Allied efforts. She shared discreet updates with a trusted contact in the resistance, passing along her observations and the deciphered portions of the letter. Using careful communication, they confirmed the identities of safe houses and potential courier rendezvous points. The information allowed the resistance to plan a controlled interception, ensuring that the double agent could be stopped without endangering civilians or alerting German authorities prematurely. By combining observation, pattern recognition, and cautious deduction, Marie transformed a simple envelope into a map of enemy activity. Ordinary life, watching streets, noting deliveries, and observing neighbors, merged with intelligence work. Each small detail, each coded symbol, and each behavior became part of a larger picture. Through her careful investigation, she laid the groundwork for a decisive move that would disrupt the double agent's operations, protect resistance networks, and change the course of covert intelligence in occupied Paris. The danger escalated rapidly as Marie's observations began to yield actionable insights. The double agent, now aware that someone might be observing patterns he believed invisible, became increasingly cautious. He changed his routes, lingered less openly, and used subtle distractions to test the vigilance of the city. Every step he took was calculated, every gesture deliberate. Marie knew that any miscalculation on her part could expose her, the resistance, and countless others to brutal reprisals. One evening, as the city was cloaked in fog, she noticed him pausing unusually near a corner she had mapped in her notebook. The sound of his boots on the damp cobblestones echoed through the alleys, mingling with the distant hum of trams and the occasional bark of a dog. His briefcase, always tightly held, appeared heavier, almost reluctant, as if carrying a critical burden. A subtle glance over his shoulder suggested suspicion, a sense that someone was watching, someone who might disrupt his carefully laid plans. Marie felt a shiver run down her spine. She realized the risk was no longer hypothetical. The German authorities had intensified their scrutiny. Patrols were longer, questioning sharper, and informants more alert. One misstep, revealing her notebook, mishandling the letter, or drawing attention in her shop, could result in arrest or execution. Even innocent civilians could be implicated, a grim reality of life under occupation. To maintain safety, Marie adjusted her strategy. She hid her notes, kept the letter carefully folded in an inconspicuous drawer, and used coded language with her trusted resistance contact. She even staged minor distractions in her shop, moving bolts of fabric, humming softly to mask her surveillance. Every ordinary action became layered with intent, balancing the need for caution with the imperative to act. The psychological strain was constant. Each knock on her door, the clatter of carts outside, or the distant conversation in the courtyard could be a signal or a threat. She slept lightly, always alert to the sounds of the city, and measured every decision against the stakes she understood so clearly. One wrong move could compromise months of intelligence gathering, destroy networks, and cost lives. The tension peaked when a fellow shopkeeper reported seeing an unfamiliar man watching Marie from across the street. She recognized the signs of a German informant, the careful observation, the note-taking in a pocket notebook, the avoidance of direct contact. And the double agent's network was not only operational, it was aware, adaptive, and ruthless. Marie realized that the window to act decisively was narrowing, and that success required courage, precision, and absolute discretion. In the shadows of occupied Paris, the ordinary rhythms of her life, sewing, opening shutters, observing passers-by, were transformed into a delicate intelligence operation. The danger was constant, the tension unrelenting, and the consequences catastrophic if she failed. Yet Marie pressed on, her resolve hardened by the knowledge that one letter, one careful action, could prevent betrayal, save lives, and stop a double agent in his tracks. The moment of revelation arrived quietly, yet with an intensity that left Marie's heart pounding. It was a gray morning in Paris. Mist clung to the streets, softening the edges of buildings and muffling distant sounds. Marie had arranged her small apartment carefully, leaving the letter in plain sight but concealing her notebook of observations. She watched the streets from her window, eyes trained on the patterns she had tracked for weeks. Then she saw him, the man in the gray coat, approaching along his usual route, briefcase in hand, glancing briefly toward her apartment as though testing the terrain. Her instincts screamed that this would be the decisive moment. She unfolded the letter again, this time cross-referencing every symbol and phrase with the roots, drop points, and coded signals she had meticulously logged. Patterns that had seemed random now aligned with frightening precision. The double agent had been coordinating clandestine exchanges across multiple districts, using everyday objects, milk crates, newspaper bundles, and discarded parcels as covert markers. The letter had revealed the exact sequence of contacts and timing for his operations. With this clarity came urgency. Marie realized she had the power to expose the entire network. Using coded signals with her resistance contact, she arranged for the interception at a specific rendezvous point that the double agent would pass that very morning. Every detail mattered: timing, positioning, and the agent's expected caution. The plan relied entirely on her observations, her interpretations of the letter, and her ability to remain invisible. One misstep could trigger an alarm, sending him fleeing, or worse, exposing the resistance network. As the agent approached the predetermined spot, he paused, scanning the surroundings, and a small package was placed in the designated location, exactly as indicated in the letter. Moments later, resistance operatives, waiting in the shadows, moved with quiet precision. The agent was intercepted before he could deliver the critical intelligence. Papers, codes, and correspondence were seized, revealing the full extent of his network. The danger that had loomed for weeks, the threat to lives, operations, and citywide security, was neutralized in an instant. The climax was not marked by violence or gunfire, but by the triumph of observation, deduction, and courage. Marie, a young widow with no formal training, had deciphered a coded letter, reconstructed an agent's routes, and facilitated the capture of a double agent. Her ordinary life, woven from threads of grief, work, and attentiveness, intersected with extraordinary circumstances, changing the trajectory of covert operations in Paris. The implications were immediate and profound. Critical intelligence that could have reached German command was prevented from leaving the city. Resistance cells, previously vulnerable, were protected, and a city teeming with spies and informants bore witness, unknowingly, to the quiet heroism of one vigilant civilian. Marie's intervention proved that courage, insight, and meticulous observation could rival the most sophisticated espionage techniques, reminding history that sometimes the smallest actors can have the largest impact. The arrest of the double agent, facilitated by a single letter and the careful observation of a young widow, had consequences that rippled far beyond Marie's small apartment in Paris. While history often highlights battles, generals, and large-scale operations, events like this demonstrate how the vigilance of civilians shaped the course of intelligence during World War II. By intercepting the agent, Marie prevented sensitive information from reaching German command, safeguarding resistance operations, protecting Allied plans, and ultimately saving lives. The operation underscored the vital role that ordinary citizens played in wartime intelligence. Unlike trained spies or military operatives, civilians had the advantage of invisibility. They were often overlooked by both occupiers and enemy agents, allowing them to observe patterns and notice details that others missed. Marie's ability to decode subtle messages, track the courier's movements, and coordinate with trusted resistance contacts illustrates the extraordinary potential of civilians acting decisively in a context that demanded secrecy and intelligence. Historians note that incidents like this were not isolated. Across occupied Europe, ordinary people, shopkeepers, bakers, seamstresses, and widows regularly intercepted communications, identified suspicious activity, and contributed to intelligence networks. Marie's actions highlight a key principle. Small interventions, when applied with precision and courage, could disrupt entire enemy operations. The capture of the double agent prevented potential sabotage, protected civilian populations, and denied critical intelligence to the German military at a moment when every piece of information could influence strategic decisions. And the case also demonstrates the symbiosis between ordinary observation and formal intelligence efforts. While Allied analysts had broader surveillance and code-breaking capabilities, they relied on the vigilance of locals to provide ground-level insights. Marie's scrutiny of a seemingly mundane letter transformed it into actionable intelligence, a bridge between civilian awareness and formal military operations. It serves as a reminder that intelligence work during the war extended beyond offices, cipher machines, and espionage training. It thrived wherever keen observation and human judgment intersected with opportunity. Finally, the incident is a testament to the unexpected forms of heroism that emerged during war. Marie's courage did not involve combat or firearms. It involved patience, reasoning, and attention to detail. In the shadow of occupation, her vigilance halted a betrayal that could have compromised countless lives. Her story demonstrates that heroism is not measured by size or rank, but by the impact of deliberate and courageous actions at critical moments. In the broader tapestry of World War II, Marie's intervention exemplifies how individual initiative, observation, and intellect could counteract the most carefully laid plans of the enemy. One young widow, a single letter, and a series of careful decisions disrupted a network of espionage, contributing to the greater Allied effort in ways both subtle and decisive. After the double agent was captured, life in Paris slowly returned to a fragile sense of normalcy, yet the shadows of occupation lingered in subtle ways: shuttered windows, wary glances, and hushed conversations in alleyways. Marie resumed her work in the small seamstress shop she had operated before the crisis, her hands returning to the familiar rhythm of stitching, pressing, and folding fabric. To the casual observer, she remained an ordinary young widow, absorbed in quiet routines, unaware of the extraordinary impact she had had on the course of espionage in the city. For Marie, however, the days carried the weight of what she had accomplished. The letter that had arrived months earlier, seemingly trivial at first glance, had become a linchpin in preventing the betrayal of Allied operations and the exposure of resistance members. Her careful observation, analysis, and coordination with the resistance had disrupted an enemy network, saving lives and altering the trajectory of covert activity in Paris. The mundane objects of her daily life, a letter, like a notebook, a glance through a window, had become tools of strategy and survival. The resistance recognized her contribution quietly. Reports circulated among trusted circles, praising the vigilance and intelligence of civilians who could detect subtle patterns in enemy activity. Marie's story, though not widely publicized during the war, became a case study in the value of civilian observation, illustrating how ordinary individuals could serve as guardians of critical information. It underscored a broader truth. In war, heroism often hides in plain sight, embedded in ordinary routines, unnoticed by most, but crucial to outcomes that shape history. Over time, Marie's experience became a symbol of courage and quiet determination. Historians studying occupied Paris and the broader intelligence operations of World War II noted how civilians intercepted messages, identified patterns, and acted decisively, often with minimal resources. The role of one widow with a keen eye demonstrated that strategic outcomes could hinge not only on armies and generals, but on the meticulous, courageous actions of ordinary people. Her vigilance, patience, and judgment provided a blueprint for others operating under similar constraints, proof that careful attention to detail and subtle intervention could counter even the most sophisticated espionage networks. Today, her story lives on as a reminder of the hidden dimensions of heroism. The apartment where she once studied the letter remains an ordinary residence, the shop restored to daily life. Yet the events that unfolded there continue to echo in historical records and resistance accounts. Marie's legacy lies in the lessons she left behind, that courage can take many forms, that intelligence is not only a matter of formal training, and that ordinary citizens, through careful observation and decisive action, can protect their communities and shape the course of history. Her quiet bravery, catalyzed by one letter, illustrates the profound impact a single person can have in times of great danger. Through vigilance, intellect, and courage, Marie not only stopped a double agent, but ensured that ordinary life in Paris could continue, preserving both human lives and the fragile threads of resistance that sustained hope during one of history's darkest periods.